Welcome to Governance Minutes, brought to you by the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals, and knowledge partner host, corporate board member.
Welcome to Governance Minutes, a new show from the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals. We're grateful to the New York Stock Exchange and corporate board member for offering us this opportunity to work with them on this program. The program will bring you the perspective of corporate secretaries and other governance professionals on emerging governance trends and practices. The Society's Darla Stuckey and I will be rotating host duties. We hope to highlight governance trends, best practices, and industry thought leaders from the standpoint of corporate secretaries who have such an important role in making governance work in the real world. While the show will be monthly, we are kicking off the season this March with two shows, starting with today's interview with Tony Horan, who's a real dean of corporate secretary from his position at JPMorgan Chase, and corporate board members TK Kerstetter. So let me start by thanking you, TK. We very much appreciate your sponsorship and support of the Society in this endeavor, and we appreciate as well your being our knowledge partner on this venture. So what are you looking for as we launch this program?
Well, you know, Ken, first of all, welcome. Welcome to our NYSE studios here. You know, we know from doing This Week in the Boardroom, which is a similar kind of show out to board members, that this was well received. We see how much, as each year goes by, the corporate secretary integrates with the board of directors. So this is our way of sort of bringing a bridge, if you will, that we can cover interesting topics and give you the platform as a society to extend that out to your membership. So we really think it's going to be of great value.
Okay, well thanks very much, and we're excited about it. Tony, I want to turn to you. Now I've known you since the mid-1990s, and at the time I think I first knew you were working on the Business Roundtable statement on corporate governance, which I personally thought was a great statement. But you clearly were experienced in governance at that time. You spoke, it seems to me, with a lot of subtlety and knowledge about corporate governance. So it goes back before then. So when did you first get involved in the field?
I got involved in it in 1994 when I joined the Office of the Secretary at Chemical, which subsequently became the Chase Manhattan Corporation through various mergers, and then JPMorgan Chase, and that was my start in governance. It actually happened just shortly after GM had published its governance principles. I think they did theirs in 1992 or 1993. And Chemical, along with a number of other companies, then started to look at it themselves to see what would we articulate in the way of governance principles and then communicate to shareholders. And that proved to be a very, very useful exercise.
So that in itself was a big development. What have you seen change over the years since then?
There's been an enormous amount that has changed in that time frame. I really feel as though it's been present through such a degree of change because we've had the necessity to change through a variety of critical events from Enron and later. We can come back to those. There has been regulatory development. The DOL said that institutional investors, Department of Labor said that institutional investors really had to vote their shares. It was an asset of a plan. That introduced a very big focus by institutional investors on how they vote. It created a cadre of governance professionals within those organizations. And we've seen a lot of change from that. We've also seen that boards of directors have understood, both because of legal and regulatory pressure, but also interest from the investor community, that their level of activity has ratcheted up very sharply over this time period.
And how has your job changed, or the job of the corporate secretary, with that?
So I think the corporate secretary serves a job vis-a-vis the board of directors that's a little bit like almost anybody's job. You have sort of three functions that you have to do for your audience. What is it that they must act on? And that might be because of a regulation or something like that. What is it that they would like to act on because they have an interest in the matter and they want to be heard? And what is it that they want to know about because it may relate to something else that they may be planning to do? And so how do you marshal the information to get to them so that, remember what boards of directors are supposed to do, and since we have a legal audience, I think I can say it's think about Smith v. Van Gorkum. You can exercise your business judgment, but you have to have some basic information on which to act. Caremark would tell you how to go out and sort of gather the information, so you have the information. But and directors like to do that. They want to be active, they want to be associated with productive enterprises, and they want to have input into it.
Right. TK, maybe I'll turn it over to you a bit on the what would you ask about the boards of directors?
Well, for this coming year, if you look at the change, probably the biggest change for this year is going to be, it's the year of shareholder communication. I think if a company and a corporate secretary doesn't recognize that, then they're going to be woefully behind. You need to know who your shareholder is. You need to know all about voting. You need to know what their tendencies are, you know, who to talk to, who will be willing to listen to something that's outside the ordinary. And one of the big reasons for that is never before has the board had to worry about withhold votes. Well, all of a sudden now with proxy 454, 452, majority voting, all of a sudden withholding votes can be a big issue. You can have directors or committees or even the whole board, you know, get a large amount of withhold votes, and it can impact whether your board is reelected or not. And directors care about that. I mean, they may not, you know, show that on the surface, but it is a big issue. And that's one of the reasons that shareholder communications is going to be so big. And probably the last thing I would mention is transparency. I mean, the transparency from the board's perspective, whether it's say on pay or whether, you know, that say on whatever's the next thing that we want to have, it has, you know, it has really gotten to a level that I think has exceeded where it should be. This is going to be my little editorial, but I understand why shareholders should be part of the election. I really do. I understand that the board is representing their interests. What I don't understand is once somebody is elected, why anybody thinks it's a good practice to sit on the director's shoulders and watch every move. None of us would like that environment, and there's no way that a shareholder is ever going to know all that goes on behind those discussions and behind the boardroom doors. So to me, you know, that's where I think we've sort of crossed the line on transparency, and I think in the long run that's going to hurt, you know, governance. So that's just a little editorial.
So the change is implicit in that, I think, is that change has picked up some momentum in the last few years with Dodd-Frank and so on. Would you agree with that, and how do you view the shareholder board interactions?
The essence of it is that shareholders own the company, and we every company needs to recognize that, and they need to recognize, really, as TK says, what are their interests, what are they looking for, what information are they going to take, and what say on pay is a perfect example of it, I think, because it's an example where we've put a burden on shareholders, where they are not just expressing a view as to whether they think the board of directors is doing the right job with respect to compensation, but they have to affirmatively approve, in effect, what is being done. That's actually changing the role of what shareholders should do versus what the board of directors should do. That's really what the board should do. Shareholders should have the ability to say, we're unhappy in this particular case, and to the extent that that's what's involved by shareholders on their vote, that's actually okay, because you want to know if your shareholders are unhappy, and you need to make changes, because over time, through a cycle, you have to be aligned with your shareholders. And boards, I think, understand that very, very well. What we're doing in the corporate secretaries world, I think, is to, on that communications side, many of the companies that we know are partnering with their investor relations area and trying to go out and talk to investors, not only at proxy time, but also at other points in time, to be able to understand what are the issues that you really want us to be thinking about in terms of governance issues. Some of it's pure esoterica, as those in the audience would know, whether it's written consent and whether or not that passes or not. but each of the governance issues needs to be addressed.
Okay.
You know, Ken, one of the things I forgot to mention that I really want to ask Tony about, and that is the issue of executive sessions. You know, a lot of directors and governance people have said to me that this was a very big event when you take the directors, take management out, have them meet on their own, and have the opportunity to, you know, bring up issues and things that they don't have to worry about how management or the CEO might feel. Is that, you know, you've been in this long enough, Tony, is that as significant as what we're hearing people say it is as far as an event?
I think it is. It was a big change at the time for corporations and boards to adopt that. I think management really was, and this is not for a particular company that I'm expressing this, I think in general management was afraid that boards might become in some fashion runaway with those things. And today, if you said to a board of directors, do you want to eliminate the idea of executive sessions, they would say, you know, why would you even ask that question? Because it's very, very, it's very, very useful. Let me add one other element that I think it's important when we look at boards and what boards do. The committees that are associated with boards play a really important role, and I think that their role has grown a lot over time because there is so much work that is being asked of the board. The board, naturally enough, in some cases it's of course required. You must have an audit committee, and you effectively must have a compensation committee. And the work that goes through those committees and the autonomy that really is associated with those committees and the committee chairs who are part of that, where they are working with management on the matters that are within the purview of their particular committees, adds a great deal to what the board itself is doing, because you don't have just one meeting with just one, call it, in some cases it's an independent chair, in some cases it's a lead director. Instead, you have a number of people around the table who have specific responsibilities for different elements of what's happening within the corporation, and that adds to a great deal more vibrancy. It also means that, going back to what corporate secretaries and management have to do, you have to work as management to be able to deliver the information. It goes back to your point on transparency. It's transparency from the company to the board, transparency then from the board and management to shareholders. But bring information, bring issues to the board of directors. Lay out the agenda for the year in advance. Agree with the board, agree with the committees what those things are going to be. What are you going to cover? And again, that falls into those categories of what must you do, what do you want to do, and then what do you want to hear about perhaps for information.
Okay.
I know we're short on time, but one point to make about that, and this was relative to corporate secretaries, there has been a big development of committees, but that corporate secretary has to remember that that information has to be pushed out to the whole board at some point, because it's not a committee's job, it's the whole board's responsibility. Correct. Even though it's audit, even though it's comp.
Some pitfalls.
Yeah, well, it's something that a corporate secretary has to say, I got to make sure that there's a setup, that this information is getting to where it needs to get to.
Yes.
Okay.
Quite agree.
Well, thanks very much, Tony, and thanks, TK. Great words of insight on our opening program. We're going to be back on March 26th. Darla Stuckey will interview David Chung from Equilar on compensation benchmarking.
Join us again next time for Governance Minutes, brought to you by the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals and Knowledge Partner host, Corporate Board Member.